Hey, everybody. I've been a lawyer since 2002, coder since '85. Anybody who works with me knows that I'm an awful coder. One of those coders you'll ever see. But I'm a really good lawyer. I have a bad idea. You want to hear my bad idea? Let's ask GPT a legal question. So right now, we're asking GPT-4, what are my parents' legal obligations to pay for a child's college education? Problem number one is that it cuts off its knowledge as of 2021. So as far as GPT knows, Roe v. Wade is still good law, right? It also is just giving general advice that is not really backed up by any statutes, not really backed up by any case law. It's just kind of giving generalized advice that could be really bad. You may have heard in New York, a bunch of lawyers got sanctioned for using GPT, and it made up hallucinated case law. That's a bad idea to get sanctioned by a federal court. Wouldn't it be better if you had a tool where you had what are the parents' legal obligations to pay for a college education that's really focused on Minnesota, that actually looks at actual legal cases and looks at actual legislation to be able to say, this is a snippet from that, and then use a large language model to be able to summarize that snippet. And to be able to do that, and then after that, you provide a memo in the form of a short response, as well as a first paragraph saying, here's a summary of, in Minnesota, parents may have a legal obligation to continue to a college savings account, but it's not explicitly mandated, but it could be included in a parenting plan. That's kind of helpful, right? And here are cases and statutes that relate to all of these things. Wouldn't that be helpful? Wouldn't that be great to have a non-hallucinated thing that comes out the door? So I'm going to play, I think it's without a net. Raise your hand if you've got a legal question that you would like the magic box to answer. Right here. That's fish, that is if you're fishing. How many fish you can have in the boat at one time? Yeah. Good. So now we are going to ask this question of the large language model. All right, so we say Minnesota law. Is there a limit of how many fish you can have in the boat at one time? Question mark. This is probably the most important legal question I've ever been asked. So here what it's doing is it's taking a vector, for people in the know, there's a vector database. There's an idea of in vector space, automobile and car and van kind of occupy the same space in vector space. So in the same way, this sentence, is there a limit of how many fish you can have in the boat at one time? We're translating that into embeddings, vector embeddings. And then what we're doing is we're going across 1 billion, with a B, legal documents. That is 1 billion statutes, regulations, judicial opinions, motions, briefs, pleadings. We've embedded all of those things too. So we're running this embedded query across the embedded 1 billion legal documents to be able to see what are the particular cases that are on point. So here's a Minnesota case from 2003 where it says Minnesota has specific regulations on the taking of fish in the boundary waters. Kind of interesting. You can see that it is 100%, it's 60% certain of this one. And now what it's doing is it's taking the vector output, and then it's now saying to the large language model, take these outputs, the non-hallucinated outputs, and summarize those outputs in the form of a memorandum, much like an associate would do a memorandum. So it's, yes, there are limits of number of fish, depending on the anglers, and the daily possession of 30 sunfish per angler and 6 walleye fish in the aggregate in general. Here's a 2003 case that said that very thing. And then you say, okay, here's a case, State versus Colomiso. It has more discussions of that. And then it also talks about the regulations. The Minnesota regulation, this is a real regulation. Here's a quote, daily 6 fish in the aggregate in general. And then here are legal caveats. You could say it's important to note that these can vary from state to state. So this is Minnesota law, but it might vary if you go over to Wisconsin. Furthermore, the number of anglers can also affect the total number of fish that can be legally held on the boat at one time, as demonstrated in this case, et cetera. This, you can imagine, is something you might ask a lawyer. That partner in the law firm would assign an associate, and then that associate would spend a day or so researching this question. But here is non-hallucinated, really good answer that that associate might be able to do. So you can imagine that this has got a lot of lawyers thinking, if I bill by the hour, and this just took me a couple of seconds, and it might have taken an hour in the past, and the slowest lawyer wins the race, what's going to happen to my business model? And I would say that's the right question to ask, and the answer is make it flat fee. Don't charge by the hour anymore. Because if you make it flat fee, you can actually reduce the cost of legal services. Because there are 80% of legal needs that are unmet because lawyers are too expensive. So what we as lawyers can do is to be able to serve that 80% of legal needs that are unmet by decreasing the cost of legal advice, much like what's the cost of having a fish in my boat? How many fish can I have? That's a good legal question. You're not going to spend $500 an hour to have somebody answer that question, but you might spend a little bit of money to do this. And so really what this product is making lawyers up their game. To say that there are some questions that are worth $500 an hour to ask. And when I worked at Robbins Kaplan, I represented Best Buy and a bunch of others, and Best Buy can pay that money. But a bunch of us in this room can't. So this is a way that we can actually reduce the cost of legal services, to reduce the cost to be able to have everyone get better access to justice. Any other questions? I have 1 minute left. Let's see what else. Go ahead.
What's the worst consequence of not paying child support?
Ooh, I like it. That seems like that is a question. What are consequences of failing to pay child support? I'll do in Minnesota law, and I'm going to say bad things are going to happen. So here's this, and I only have 47 seconds. I may well not do it. It's going to take longer than 47 seconds. But it's a little bit of time, but that's fine. But so if you have any questions, the company is called VLEX. My desk is in Washington, D.C., but I'm living right here in River City. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. I'm now 30 seconds later. If you want to get the answer to this question, follow up with me later. All right. Thanks, everybody.